Known as Green Beret all over the world but renamed to Russian Attack for the US market, this early Konami 1985 arcade release was quite a success back in its day, making way for many home ports. The US title of Russian Attack is actually to resemble the game's Cold War setting, and its reliance on the player using a knife to dispatch enemies. Remember, this was at a time when the US and Russia were not getting along so well. This port is practically unplayable. The timing of the hits is way off. Basically, if you try and attack your enemy when they're next to you, you're gonna die. You need to press your attack button at least a second before they are near you. This makes timing the attacks very difficult. It also makes it impossible to attack two enemies that are close to each other. Yet another duff port. Things are not looking too hot so far in the world of Green Beret ports. This BBC Micro version just has far too enemies on screen, making it near impossible to complete. The only reason I got this far is because my copy keeps glitching out, making me invincible. Lucky me. Yet another fantastic home port for the C64. This version retains the look and feel of the arcade game despite running on much weaker hardware. Graphically, this kinda looks pretty good. I do like the chunky looking sprites, however, the slow jerky scrolling can lead to some unfair deaths at times. Also, your character's attack doesn't always seem to work, leaving you vulnerable to the enemy. Unlike all the other home computer ports, this MS-DOS version was actually developed by Konami. Or should that be Konami asked two Western programmers to develop it for them. As a result, this is a pretty good version despite the lack of colour and awful PC speaker sound. It's just a shame that I'm having to play using the keyboard. The game does support joysticks, but I had issues getting it to run. It also supports mouse controls, which are interesting to say the least. Unlike the normal Famicom NES release, this disk system release differs in that you can now spawn exactly where you died, rather than being sent back to a checkpoint. It also has far more special weapon guides dotted throughout the level, although now they only give you one shot rather than 3, but you can collect up to 9 of them. The game also allows simultaneous 2-player action, unlike other versions, and 2 new stages. The regular NES version came out under the name of Russian Attack in the US and Europe, which is kind of odd since the game was known on all formats over the world apart from the US as Green Beret. I guess Konami couldn't be bothered changing the name back to the original title for Europe. This version is pretty much like the disc system release, besides only being able to spawn where you died if 2 players are present. You can also only collect up to 3 special shots. Game Boy Advance port can be found on the Konami Arcade Advance collection. The game features the same stages as the arcade version, as well as 2 extra stages accessible via the Konami code. These stages are based upon the extra stages found in the NES version. A 2-player versus mode has also been added, which utilizes the game link cable. The controls have been changed so that the player presses A button to jump instead of pushing up on the D-pad, just like it was in the arcade original. Oh my, the Plus 4 was the very first computer I owned, but I never remember it being this bad. What we have here is something that wouldn't even pass for the high school coders contest. All for controls, floaty jumps, and keyboard only controls. The Thomson was a French home computer, kinda similar to the ZX Spectrum. The system was never really known outside of France, which is why you may have never heard of it. That's not to say it didn't receive arcade game ports. This version of Green Beret seems to be based upon the Spectrum version, however, I can't say how it plays because I couldn't get the directions to work. This ZX Spectrum port is pretty clunky compared to the C64 version. While it does control okay, it doesn't feel like Green Beret. There's also the problem of enemies ganging up on you, making it impossible to escape situations at times. Overall, not a bad effort, but far from the best. And let's take a look at all those versions of Green Beret running side by side.